Nobody expected the afternoon to turn into something that would later be whispered about in disbelief. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. Quiet streets, light traffic, and nothing more than routine patrols. But in a single, shocking moment, everything changed. An 85-year-old woman, fragile yet dignified, found herself at the center of a confrontation that would ripple far beyond that sidewalk. And the officer involved had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. The elderly woman had been moving slowly, carefully, with the kind of deliberate steps that come from decades of lived experience. She wasn't causing trouble. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't resisting. Yet something about the exchange escalated faster than anyone nearby could process. Voices rose. Hands gestured. A small crowd began to gather, sensing tension building in the air like static before a storm. Then it happened. In a split second that seemed to stretch into eternity, the officer's frustration boiled over. The sound echoed sharply. A slap that cut through the air with a force that silenced everything around it. Conversations stopped. Birds scattered. Even the wind seemed to pause. The 85-year-old woman stumbled, not just from the impact, but from the disbelief. No one could quite comprehend what they had just witnessed. Phones came out almost instantly. Gasps rippled through the bystanders. Some froze. Others whispered urgently. But the officer remained unaware of one critical detail. A detail that would transform this moment from shocking to unforgettable. Because the elderly woman wasn't just anyone. She was the mother of Ronda Rousey. And he had no idea. At first, the situation appeared contained. The officer adjusted his stance, attempting to regain control of the scene. The woman steadied herself, her expression not one of anger, but something far more powerful, quiet resolve. That calmness unsettled the crowd even more. It was as if she knew something no one else did. Within minutes, word began to spread. A passerby recognized her. A name was whispered, then repeated, then spoken louder. Heads turned, eyes widened. The energy shifted instantly. What had seemed like a routine altercation was now something entirely different. The officer sensed the change before he understood it. Conversations grew sharper. The crowd no longer looked uncertain, they looked aware. And awareness carries weight. Still, he didn't know. Miles away, unaware of what was unfolding, Ronda Rousey was going about her day. The former champion, known for her unmatched intensity and unshakable composure, had built a reputation on discipline, strength, and loyalty, especially when it came to family. Few understood just how protective she was of the people she loved. Back on that sidewalk, the atmosphere thickened. The elderly woman refused assistance at first. She stood on her own, chin lifted, eyes steady. The mark on her face was visible, but what stood out more was her silence. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't fear. It was patience. And patience can be dangerous. Sirens were not blaring. There were no dramatic chases. Just a growing realization that something irreversible had occurred. The officer began speaking again, but his voice no longer carried authority. It carried uncertainty. He scanned the faces around him and noticed something had changed. They weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting. A bystander made a call. Another uploaded a video. Within moments, the clip began circulating. Views climbed. Comments flooded in. And somewhere, someone tagged the one person who would inevitably see it. Time stretched painfully. The elderly woman was escorted to a bench. She declined medical attention. She declined to press charges. She said very little, but her eyes told a different story, not of revenge, but of consequence. The officer finally asked the question that would alter everything. Who is she? The answer came quietly at first. You don't know? A pause. That's Ronda Rousey's mother. Silence followed, the kind of silence that doesn't just fill space, but swallows it. The officer's posture shifted subtly. His jaw tightened. Not from anger this time, but realization. The weight of the name hung heavy in the air.
Ronda Rousey.
A name synonymous with power, with discipline, with controlled force, with someone who had built a career on responding decisively when boundaries were crossed. The officer swallowed hard. But here's what made the moment even more intense. The elderly woman still hadn't made a scene. She hadn't demanded attention. She hadn't raised her voice. Her composure only amplified the gravity of what had happened. Because when someone powerful chooses silence, it usually means the response hasn't arrived yet. News outlets began to pick up the story. Speculation spread faster than facts. Commentators debated. Supporters rallied. Critics analyzed every frame of the footage. And still, the officer had not heard directly from Ronda herself. That was the part that unsettled him most. No statement, no reaction, just silence. And silence, in situations like this, is louder than outrage. Hours passed. Then came the moment no one was prepared for. Not the crowd, not the department, and certainly not the officer. A black SUV pulled up quietly near the scene later that evening. The door opened, and stepping out with measured calm was Ronda Rousey. There were no dramatic gestures. No shouting. No chows. Just a controlled, focused presence that commanded attention without demanding it. The crowd parted instinctively. Cameras lifted. Breaths were held. She walked straight to her mother first, knelt slightly, spoke softly. No one could hear what was said. That made it even more powerful. Then she stood, and finally looked at the officer. The tension in that single glance could have shattered glass. It wasn't rage. It wasn't fury. It was something far more unsettling: calculation. The officer attempted to speak, but the words didn't land. Because in that moment it was no longer about physical strength. It was about accountability. The crowd leaned forward collectively. What would she do? What would she say? Would she escalate it? Would she forgive? Would she make an example out of him? The world seemed suspended in that question. Ronda took one step forward, then stopped, and instead of raising her voice, she did something no one expected. She simply said calmly, "We'll handle this properly." For words, but they carried more weight than any outburst could have. Because everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Legal teams began moving quietly. Internal investigations were launched. Statements were requested. Departments scrambled to respond. And through it all, Ronda remained composed, strategic, and deliberate. The officer realized too late that the moment he acted impulsively, he had stepped into a storm far bigger than he imagined. And yet, the most powerful part of the story isn't what happened on that sidewalk. It's what happened after. Conversations behind closed doors. Decisions made in silence. Consequences that unfold slowly, but permanently. To this day, people still debate what truly happened next. Some claim the resolution was swift. Others insist it was far more complex. But one thing is certain. The officer had no idea who her daughter was. And by the time he found out, it was already too late. What happened after that confrontation? What decisions were made when cameras were off? Because the ending continues long after the cameras stop recording and the headlines fade from the front page. In the weeks that followed, the story didn't disappear. It evolved. What had started as a single shocking moment on a quiet street became a case study discussed in community meetings, training rooms, and online forums. The footage was analyzed frame by frame. Body language experts weighed in. Former officers gave interviews. Legal professionals debated procedure versus impulse. And through it all, one image remained etched into the public's mind. An 85-year-old woman standing upright after being struck, refusing to crumble. But beyond the public discussion, something else was unfolding. Behind closed doors, policies were being reviewed with a level of scrutiny rarely seen. Supervisors who once skimmed through incident reports now examined every line. Training officers revisited de-escalation modules. Veteran staff members were asked hard questions about instinct, authority, and restraint. It wasn't loud reform. It wasn't dramatic overhaul. It was slow, deliberate recalibration. And that kind of change runs deeper. The officer at the center of it all faced more than just suspension or review. He faced reflection. The kind that creeps in during quiet nights and early mornings. The kind that replays a moment over and over, the raised hand, the split-second decision, the realization that followed. Consequences aren't always immediate. Sometimes they unfold internally before they manifest externally. Meanwhile, Ronda remained publicly composed. She didn't flood social media with outrage. She didn't turn the incident into spectacle. Instead, she chose strategic patience. Appearances were carefully timed. Statements were measured. Every word carried intention. And that restraint carried more force than fury ever could. Community leaders reached out privately. Advocacy groups requested meetings. Civil rights attorneys offered counsel. The story had transcended celebrity. It became about dignity, about age, about power dynamics, about how quickly authority can tip into excess. Still, one question refused to fade. What was said in that final private conversation? The one without microphones, without reporters, without witnesses. Some claim the officer apologized directly, not as a formality, but as a man confronting his own misjudgment. Others suggest the conversation was colder, more procedural than personal. But no official account has ever surfaced. And maybe that's intentional, because sometimes the most powerful exchanges are the ones not performed for an audience. The elderly woman, despite everything, never sought revenge. She declined lawsuits that would have guaranteed headlines for months. She declined televised interviews that would have amplified outrage. Instead, she chose something quieter, something more unsettling to those expecting drama. She chose dignity, and dignity in moments like this becomes unshakable. Months passed. The officer's case reached its conclusion quietly. Disciplinary action was finalized. Mandatory retraining was completed. His record would forever carry a notation, a reminder that one impulsive second can reshape an entire career. But the ripple effects extended further. New departmental guidelines emphasized senior citizen interactions. Additional de-escalation certifications became required. Community ride-along programs expanded. The shift wasn't explosive. It was structural. And structural change lasts longer than viral outrage. As for Ronda, she returned to her life, training, public appearances, commitments, but something about her interviews felt subtly different afterward. When asked about strength, she spoke more about restraint. When asked about power, she emphasized responsibility. The undertone was unmistakable. True strength isn't proven in retaliation.